Welcome everyone to the Strengthening Partnership for Students with Disabilities webinar series. Our session topic is Pathway to a Diploma for Students with Disabilities, What You Need to Know. This presentation is brought to you by the California Department of Education, Special Education Division, and the Seeds of Partnership Project. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us. Next slide. As we get started, I want to point out that we have a few language options for this session. American Sign Language will be spotlighted. Captions and translated captions can be accessed by finding the Show Captions icon at the bottom of the Zoom menu and selecting the arrow. This opens up a menu where you can select the translation button, and if it's turned blue, then it's active. On the menu, choose My Caption Language, where you select the language you'd like the captions to display. For example, this slide shows the speaking language is English and what looks like if I'm choosing to display Spanish captions. I will now pause to share this introduction in Spanish for the translated captions.
Tenemos algunas opciones de idiomas para esta sesión. Lenguaje americano de señas, que se destacará. Subtítulos traducidos en otros idiomas que usted puede acceder encontrando el botón que dice Show Captions en la parte inferior de la pantalla del menú de Zoom y seleccione la flecha hacia arriba. Esto abrirá otro menú donde puede seleccionar el botón de traducción. Si el botón está en color azul, significa que está activo. En el menú, escoja My Caption Language y escoja el idioma que usted desee leer los subtítulos. Por ejemplo, esta diapositiva dice que el idioma hablado es inglés y que los subtítulos estarán en español.
My name is Robin Ryan, and I'm the coordinator of Seeds of Partnership Project. And with me supporting in this session are colleagues from Seeds of Partnership and the California Department of Education, Special Education Division team. We're excited to bring forward this webinar series. Our goal is to create a space where families of children and young adults with disabilities, educators, and other professionals come together to learn and connect with effective strategies, resources, and insights that support students with disabilities. Sharing knowledge and experiences through presentations and spotlights, our aim is that these sessions will inspire meaningful conversations, foster collaboration, and highlight the voices of parents, students, educators, and others who support to make a difference in students' lives. Our topics are generated from direct input from both families and educators in California, and we look forward to adding additional areas highlighted by those of you joining us in these sessions or tuning into a recording and completing the feedback form. We're adding the link to that feedback form now into the chat, and it will also be displayed on the screen toward the end of our session. We do hope you take the time to share your thoughts with us about the session and considerations for future sessions. This session is being recorded, and it will be available on our Seeds of Partnership website in the e-learning gallery, where you can also find previous recordings and registration for upcoming webinars. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Seeds of Partnership is a longstanding technical assistance project housed within the Sacramento County Office of Education and funded by the California Department of Education, Special Education Division. We partner with California Department of Education on a variety of initiatives, and our work spans several areas, providing training, developing resources, offering support around all things family engagement, assisting with compliance and improvement monitoring, coordinating support for 33 family empowerment centers across California, etc. So to learn more about our work and resources, we do invite you to visit our website at www.seedsofpartnership.org. Next slide. In our session today, our focus is that we're going to share an overview of the pathways to high school diploma in California and what the state graduation requirements look like, because having that foundation is key before we dive in deeper. We'll focus on the California Alternative Pathway to High School Diploma, specifically designed for students with significant disabilities. What is it? how it works, and what families need to know. And along the way, we'll share resources related to those requirements and the important considerations for students with disabilities so that you leave today with something you can use. In the spotlight for this session are two projects that are funded through the California Department of Education Special Education Division. Their work is part of the California statewide system of support efforts. California Includes, led by Sacramento County Office of Education, has a focus on developing and disseminating resources designed to assist families, educators, and the community in better understanding school and community inclusion and belonging for students with all levels of support needs. We will hear from Executive Director Kristen Wright. High Quality IEPs is led by East County SELPA and Santa Clara County SELPA and has a focus on supporting meaningful engagement in the Individualized Education Program, or IEP. Through training and resource development, they aim to increase knowledge and engagement of families and students and build the capacity of local education agencies, county offices, and SELPAs so that IEP design and development results in educational benefit. We will be joined by Executive Director Heather DeFeeti. Both programs aim to support educators and parents in leading to increased outcomes for students. Next slide. I'd like to now welcome our California Department of Education Special Education Division Director, Rachel Heenan, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Rachel Heenan. I'm the Director of the Special Education Division at the California Department of Education. And welcome back to the latest session of Strengthening Partnerships for Students with Disabilities webinar series. It's been a few months since I last spoke to you all, but I know that you were in wonderful hands with our Associate Director, Shiloh Duncan Besseril, who welcomed you to last month's session. So in the most recent webinar series, I repeatedly return back to our Special Education Division's mission statement because it truly guides the work of each one of our divisions, over 180 employees. And that is, one day, every student in California will flourish in an inclusive and equitable learning environment, driven by innovative and personalized support and services that deliver exceptional educational outcomes essential to a purposeful and fulfilling adulthood. And one of the numerous ways that we aspire towards this goal is by offering additional avenues to our students with disabilities to earn their high school diploma and fulfill this stage of their educational journey. This ongoing work was undertaken by numerous communities, constituents, and colleagues across California as we set the standard and expectations for students with extensive disabilities to access a diploma, which directly connects us back to today's webinar, where we focus on the pathway to a diploma for students with disabilities, what you need to know. In this session, we'll explore the newest pathways available for students to earn their high school diploma by focusing on the diploma pathway for students who qualify for the California Alternate Assessment. Remember, these students are most often our students with the most extensive needs. This pathway was chaptered or signed into law and went into effect on June 30th, 2022, and was most recently amended through Senate Bill 153 on June 29, 2024. So as a reminder to everyone, this is not a program that CDE is piloting, but it's an expectation that requires LEAs or school districts to offer this pathway for all students who qualify. And it's a pathway that over 400 graduates utilized in the 24-25 academic year alone, over 400 students. And additionally, we will discuss statutory requirements, key considerations for IEP teams, and how districts and schools within California are embracing this opportunity and exceeding this expectation. So on behalf of the California Department of Education Special Ed Division, an enormous thank you to everyone that continues to partner with us to learn as we build stronger, more informed, and more collaborative partnerships between our families, our educators, and special ed support systems across California. Moreover, always an enormous thanks To our partners from the Inclusive Practices and Systems Project, High Quality IEPs Project, who have joined us today to explore this essential topic. And last, as always, my sincere thanks to Robin Ryan from CESA Partnership and her tremendous work on this amazing webinar series that continues to evolve over these many months and continues to meet the needs of our various communities. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Rachel. So before we move on to our presenters, I want to take a moment to further set this stage for why we're here today. As parents and families of students with disabilities and educators that work closely with students, you are their most important advocates to ensure that they have access to education. And that means being informed about all of the options available to them. California offers multiple pathways to high school diploma for students with disabilities. But here's the thing, many families don't learn about these alternative pathways until late in their child's school career. And by then, some doors may already be closing. The decisions that get made in IEP meetings, sometimes as early as middle school, can shape which pathway your child's on. When you understand those pathways, you can better ask questions and push for the right supports and make sure your child's plan truly does reflect their strengths and their future. And the future matters, whether it's going to be going to college, entering in the workforce, or living as independently as possible. The pathway your child takes toward their diploma has real implications for what comes next. As districts are adjusting to the law and including the alternative pathway to diploma, we are seeing districts implement this pathway to a diploma in varied ways. Some have built out inclusive, individualized approaches, and others are in various stages of mapping out plans and efforts. That's exactly why today's session is so important and why we hope that you will keep learning and keep asking questions of your school district, your educators, and of each other. So thank you for joining us in this session. Next slide. I'd like to now welcome Kristen Wright, Executive Director of Inclusive Practices and Systems at the Sacramento County Office of Education. And later we'll hear from Heather DeFede, Executive Director of High Quality IEP Project. And so we are starting out, though, today with Kristen. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Dr. Heenan, for your leadership. It's exciting to be part of a fundamental shift towards higher expectations for a group of California students with disabilities who traditionally did not have a path to a high school diploma. So I guess the state's vision is really simple, but it's transformative, that every student with a disability, including those with the most significant cognitive disabilities, begin their school journey not with a question mark, but with the certainty that a high school diploma is within their reach. And so the creation of the alternative pathway to a high school diploma in law ensures that we aren't just creating a new route, but that we're honoring the potential of every learner and ensuring that graduation for all truly means graduation for all. Next slide. So with this vision that all students with disabilities, including our students with significant cognitive disability, should enter high school knowing that they have the opportunity to earn a diploma, allows us the opportunity to backward map, if you will, to make sure that from the very beginning, when students and their families enter the school system, they know that they are on a path to graduation and employment and realizing whatever dreams that they have for their future. Next slide. So, as Dr. Heenan spoke earlier, who is eligible for the alternative pathway to a high school diploma? So let's set the stage here for who we're talking about for this particular pathway, and we'll get into a few other pathways as we move along. But the one we're really going to focus on today is the alternative pathway to a high school diploma, and that's specifically for students with disabilities who entered the 9th grade, or actually, we'll talk about that in a minute. This was the original legislation, who were in 10th grade or higher in the 22-23 school year and are eligible to take the alternate assessment. Now, let's just be clear. Those are for the students who are eligible to take the alternate assessment. So that group of students that in federal law are considered students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And this is traditionally our group of students who did not have a pathway before. Next slide. So as Dr. Heenan also pointed out, so Ed Code was changed a number of years ago to also include, before the alt pathway even came into play, to look at a group of students who would also be able to have statutory exemption from local requirements. So as we get into this conversation today, you're going to see that this students with disabilities that are on the alt pathway, they're not alone. Foster youth, members of military families, homeless youth, English language learners, adjudicated youth, and youth in alternate ed participants or settings, they also have an opportunity to have a pathway where they do not have to meet requirements beyond the statewide requirements required in statute. So let's go to the next slide and we can talk a little bit more about the pathway. So as you see, this is a lot of words, but we're giving you these words because it's important that you have access to the law. And within these words, you'll see some highlighted words. And I'm going to read through a few of them so that we can talk about them a little bit more. So for this group of students that are on the alternative pathway, a school, a local educational agency, which is a district, county, school, shall exempt an individual with exceptional needs from all courses and other requirements that are additional to the statewide course requirements. So, meaning that they still need to meet all the minimum graduation requirements in order to be awarded a diploma. And the diploma they're awarded is a high school diploma. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how states were able to do this. But California's law that you're seeing right here basically says that the pupil will be awarded a diploma. This is not a different diploma than is awarded students without disabilities. This is the same diploma. What will be different is the pathway and some of the requirements that they have to meet in order to receive the diploma.
So for students in California that have the district boards are the governing body that determine what the graduation requirements are for that local district. And many districts have requirements, whether it's community service or A through G courses that are above and beyond the requirements at the state level. So this education code says for students with disabilities that meet all of these other requirements, this alternative pathway exempts them from all of those LEA level requirements, whether it's A through G requirements, community service, whatever the local board has set. So that is what this education code is doing. And this is for the group of students that entered ninth grade in the 22-23 school year or later. So this is a shall. The districts must have this pathway for students who entered ninth grade in the 22-23 school year or later and exempt them from all those local requirements. And what they have to do in order to earn this diploma is their IEP team has to determine that they are eligible for the alternate assessment. So that means, as Kristen said, they have a significant cognitive disability and are eligible to take the alternate assessment. And some of you might be familiar with that as the CAA, CAA, or California Alternate Assessment. So they have to be eligible, meaning they have a significant cognitive disability, and they have to complete the coursework. So those statewide course requirements are aligned to state standards. So if you're looking at the California Department of Education's website, there are content connectors and essential standards that align. So those are the course, when they say standards aligned coursework, It's looking at those achievement standards that are aligned to the state standards. So I see Kristen's back, and I will turn it back over to her for the next slide where she can talk about the may when we've just gone through the shall.
All right. So, as we mentioned previously, and apologies, the power goes out at the most inopportune times. A local educational agency may exempt an individual with exceptional needs who is enrolled in grade 10 or higher in the 22-23 school year. And as I stated earlier, that first statute that you saw on the previous slide, that was part 1. As Dr. Heenan stated, in 2024, it was updated to part 2 to make sure that the state wasn't missing, they weren't missing any students who were already in high school, who may still be able to meet those minimum requirements, that they could also still get a diploma. So the state went back, they made that adjustment. And so as long as a student met the criteria by the time they left the system at 22, they would also be able to get a diploma. It wasn't as narrow as that who entered 9th grade. All right, next slide. So let's look a little bit about those different pathways that we were talking about earlier. So we know that many schools and districts have requirements that are beyond the state minimum requirements. Sometimes they're called A to G requirements or other additional requirements. Those requirements doesn't mean that students with disabilities can't meet those requirements, but they are not required to meet those requirements for this pathway in order to earn a high school diploma. All right, so we have our A to G pathway. We have our traditional high school diploma pathway. We have the pathway that we talked about earlier that includes our foster youth, military families, and others. And now we have in yellow that you see on the screen, the new pathway, the alternative pathway for students with significant cognitive disabilities who are eligible for the California Alternate Assessment, okay? And you'll see on there the requirements. I'll let you read through those. One of the things that we want to think about is that, like I said earlier, they will receive the same diploma no matter which pathway you're on in these 4 columns. You receive the same diploma. It's how you get there that is different. And so I think as Heather was describing when I got cut off there online for a minute, the requirements for this group of students is that they're meeting the standards in an aligned way. They're not meeting the full rigor of every standard. They are, though, in fact, required to be able to have access to all their grade level standards, all the way from TK through high school, but they are able to meet them in an aligned way. And so some things, the transcripts may look a little bit different. The diploma looks the same. Next slide. So when we're talking about, there's a number of groups of students with disabilities that as we were having these discussions as a state, that were not included in this alternative pathway. And so you may be thinking to yourself, well, what about the students that struggle to meet the requirements, but are not students with significant cognitive disabilities? There is a body of work called Inclusive Access to a Diploma, or ALT-MEANS. And that body of work said, there's a group of students who we'll call students in more of a moderate category, who may just need other ways to show that they're learning and that they access information. So they're still learning the full rigor of their grade level standards. The expectations are the same, but the way that the information is presented and the way that they can show what they know might be different. So there's a set of resources that have been developed, and I think you see on here the website. I recommend you look at those if you are thinking about that middle group of students. Not the traditional, most students with disabilities will be on the traditional pathway and earning their diploma with their accommodations from their IEP or in services. This moderate group may need to have other ways to show what they know, but are also earning on the traditional pathway. all the groups of students are all required to meet the statewide minimum standards for graduation and courses. Next slide. What are those requirements? So for every single student in the state of California, these are the minimum graduation requirements. Why should these matter to you, to me, to us right now? These are the requirements we want to make sure as parents and families and teachers and community members that our students are queued up to take. So if we're looking at a course sequence starting in ninth grade, we want to make sure that each year our students have access to be taking the courses that they're going to need for graduation. Because we don't want to get to 12th grade and have way too many credits or not have had access to the courses that we need in order for graduation to occur. Now, because under the IDEA, students have a right to do their education until age 22 within the school system, it may take longer to earn these credits. And that's the whole point of having more time, is it may take a little longer. You may take some fewer classes. Someone may repeat a class. But at the end of the day, everyone needs to have the courses, enough course credits in order to meet the minimum statewide requirements. And you know, as a parent of a child with extensive support needs, I was wondering how would they meet all these requirements and also be able to get all their supports and services, their OT and PT and transition and employment training, all those things. How would they be able to meet all these requirements? It's actually possible. And it's possible without having it be too scary or stressful. So there's been a lot of work done to ensure that students, from the time that they enter high school until the time they leave, and for this particular pathway, even if you get your diploma along the way, say you get your diploma after your 4th year or 5th year from the alt pathway, you still have a right under IDEA to stay in services till you're 22 if that's what your plan is. If you have more transition services that you want to do, you have more work to do around other IEP goals, you have a right to stay until you're 22. Next slide. So Heather, do you want to, I'm going to kick this over to you to talk a little bit about the assessment piece, since I think it's developed by high quality IEPs.
So as we've been talking about, and I know there's a lot of different pathways, and it might be feeling overwhelming, all the different pathways we've talked about and the flexibilities that exist within California. So as we talked about, the state board of each district's board determines the graduation requirements. In state education code, there are a variety of flexibilities that existed long before this pathway, but there were flexibilities for that group of students with and without disabilities who are foster youth, incarcerated youth, military connected youth. So those flexibilities, those are students that would go the traditional pathway, even though they have some flexibilities. So that's the standard pathway to those are standard pathway to a diploma and alternative pathways to a diploma. And for this group of students that we're talking about today, it's for those that are eligible for the alternate assessment who have a significant cognitive disability. So this resource is available on the High Quality IEPs website at highqualityiep's.net. And it helps IEP teams understand how to choose the appropriate assessment for the student and the implications of the assessment. Because we do hear there are some folks that are like, hey, this is a great way for me to have some flexibilities to a diploma, but it's truly only for the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities where there was not previously a diploma. So this is a great resource for you to access.
And Heather, maybe we can just, for a minute, I think this is relevant, you know, because we have some questions in our
I was trying to weave them in too, yeah.
Yeah, that we just wanted to make sure to recognize, because we get a lot of feedback when we're out presenting on this topic from parents that say, well, what about my student? What about the students who are still struggling to meet the minimum requirements, but do not qualify for the alt pathway. That group of students, still has till age 22 to be able to meet all those requirements for graduation, right? And the question was, is the local board approved graduation requirements, or we mean the state diploma requirements? For right now, the only exempted group of students with disabilities from additional requirements are the students that are on the alt pathway. However, local boards can have conversations about everyone has to meet the minimum graduation requirements, right? But it may be a conversation with your IEP team and looking at your own board policies in your district about what possibilities there are. Heather, do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, so the earlier slides where we talked about military connected youth, foster youth, those flexibilities exist for all students and have existed for several years. So you may be a student with a disability who may also qualify for some of those exemptions to the local requirements. So there are a variety of things that you should consider with your IEP teams to determine which pathway to a diploma is best for your child. I think all districts have already adopted the graduation requirements for the alternative pathway that we're describing here today, which is found in Education Code 51225.31. And so I believe most districts across the state, I haven't heard of any that haven't at least adopted the board policy. But whether or not they have a board approved graduation requirement, we're going to get into later of whether or not it accounts on the district's dashboard. We have another resource that will describe that later. And I think the important thing that we maybe haven't touched on yet is that this pathway is for students who are eligible for the alternate assessment. It does not require them to be in a separate setting or in an extensive support needs class in their IEP setting. It's based on whether or not they're eligible for the alternate assessment. It does not take a student that's in a general education class who does have a significant cognitive disability and say you have to move over to a separate setting in order to obtain this diploma through this pathway. So I think it's really important that placement of the student is not what drives their eligibility, but whether or not they are eligible for the alternate assessment because they have a significant cognitive disability.
Thank you, Heather. And to add on to that, in any environment a student is being educated in, they should have an option to be on this pathway if they qualify, right? So it shouldn't matter what type of environment they're in. So if they are in a more restricted setting, students in every setting have a legal right to this pathway should they meet the other minimum requirements for this pathway. And we can answer some more of these questions online. I want to make sure we have a chance to get through the rest of the information so you all have additional information. Shall we continue on the journey? Next slide. I think we talked a little earlier about the diploma document. When your student receives a high school diploma, they will receive the same diploma. There will not be anything on the diploma that says alternate diploma or anything like that. However, on the transcript, it will reflect the courses that the student took, both what they were and to ensure that they meet the minimum graduation requirements. Next slide. So one of the things that has come up a lot in this work is around how we talk about the diploma. And in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the federal law that gave states the ability to define an alternate diploma pathway for which they call an alternate diploma. So I want to make this really clear. We report to the feds whether or not we have students on an alternate diploma. But states have a right to be able to define and name how that is rolled out in their state. California had a work group that was convened to figure out what California should do in order to take advantage of this pathway. So this work group felt that it was important that the diploma that came from the completion of this pathway didn't differ from the regular diploma. Because the diploma that was labeled or described as alternate, as I said before, would result maybe in more exclusion. They've got something different or separate from students without disabilities. And we didn't, the work group did not want any limitation on for our students when they went to get jobs. So when you get a diploma on this pathway and you go to a job and apply and you say, did you get a high school diploma? The answer is yes, you did. And then there would be other requirements, I'm sure, for that job as well. Next slide. Heather, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of students with disabilities have difficulty with is that Algebra 1 requirement, right? So the question comes up a lot about the Algebra 1 requirement in students that are on the alternative pathway to a diploma. Yes, they still need to meet the Algebra 1 requirement. However, go back to when we talked about that education code, and it is coursework aligned to the state standards. So just like all of their English courses, their science courses, it's going to be coursework that's aligned to the state standards and not requiring the same course standards that are in an Algebra 1 course. So think through that way for the educators to be looking at the content being aligned to those state standards for the algebra requirements. And we've done a lot of work of supporting districts across the state and giving them tools to meet that. So just remember, don't think of your typical algebra requirement standards. It's these alternate standards that are aligned to that course.
All right, next slide. We want to make sure, and I know we've given you a lot of information so far. We're not done giving you more information, but we also want to make sure that you have access to this information at your fingertips. So as part of the resources that are provided with this webinar, there's also been some guides developed, a family guide, as you see, as well as a LEA or a school district guide around the pathway that answers basic questions and also provides questions that IEP teams can consider. Because the bottom line is we want to make sure that every student has access to high quality academic learning with the idea that they will go on to high school and then be able to make any choice they want, whether that's to go on to college or job or community, whatever that is. We want to make sure that that is rigorous and that we were asking those questions with IEP teams, and that you as families have an opportunity to bring this information forward. So we hope we'll use these. Feel free to share these with your districts and schools. And for districts and schools, make sure you share these with your families so that everyone's armed with the same information. I think there was a question earlier about what if your district doesn't have this pathway. The reality is that districts need to have a pathway under state law for students to be able to access. So the law was developed a number of years ago, and I know districts are at different places on their journey, and we have a lot of great work going on. And if you have a district that is still a little uncertain, please have them reach out to us so we can help them be part of our community of practice for the ALT pathway. Next slide. So we're going to say this one more time, just so that you have it in writing. The ALT pathway provides this provision that students do not need to meet additional adopted district requirements for a diploma like A to G, regardless of what the LEA policy is. So this is state law. Minimum statewide requirements are what are required for this graduation, the diploma, a diploma through this graduation pathway. And the law is there for you as well, just in case. Next slide.
So A lot of this has been a big shift for the state of California, and districts across the state are working very diligently to ensure that this pathway is set up and meaningful for the students. So some things, if you are here as a school district or a teacher, or maybe as a parent, and understanding all the work that a district has to go into making this pathway, we really want school teams to reflect. Are your students that are in extensive support needs getting access to their grade level or aligned academic standards? We need to set high expectations for our students and not just rely on functional skills, but making sure there is some alignment to these state standards, and making sure that our educators are expected to teach those grade level content standards, regardless if a student is in a separate setting or included in the general education setting. As districts, we need to make sure our teachers and support staff are trained in those content standards, and also have access to universal design for learning so that they can adapt the state standards and support students as they need. And making sure our teachers who are teaching in any separate settings, that they're set up for success in those, to teach those grade level standards. Do they have curriculum that aligns to those state standards? So really, as a district, this is a moment to reflect of what support you have for the teachers that are in the classrooms. And then within districts and counties across the state, we're seeing that they are having these conversations and making sure that all of our students have a pathway to a diploma. But it does take collaboration and work across multiple parts of a district in a school. And hopefully today, we're working towards supporting those districts, as well as supporting our families, so that as a family and an important member of the IEP team, you are aware of this pathway to a diploma for all students. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about a resource that we have developed with high quality IEPs, and California includes. And this resource is available to everybody on the High Quality IEPs website. And we're going to just do a few pieces of this resource, but if you do have questions, and I see many of the questions in the chat also tie right to this particular resource. So on the next slide, we're going to first start with the different pathways to the diploma. You'll see the green. Those are students that are eligible to take the Smarter Balanced assessment. And then on the right side of this resource in the blue are the students that are eligible for the alternate assessment. So this kind of gives you a comparison and contrast throughout the many questions you may have. So the majority of students with a disability are taking the Smarter Balanced assessment. That is the vast majority of our students. About 1% of our students with disabilities are eligible to take the alternate assessment. So about 1% of our population will be looking at this alternative pathway. So on the next slide, there were some questions in the chat about access to a free and appropriate public education. And Kristen talked about this a little bit, about the opportunities for students to have extended time to complete all the diploma requirements. Students with disabilities, whether they're eligible for the Smarter Balanced test or the California Alternate Assessment, are eligible to receive a free and appropriate public education until they graduate with a standard diploma or until age 22. So whichever track you're on, you're eligible until 22, and unless you graduate with a standard diploma. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about that diploma a little bit. Kristen did talk about the naming conventions and the diploma. This California Department of Education, we have an additional resource at the end of this training, gives much more detail on diplomas and transcripts. But their high school diploma, whether it's earned through the traditional or an alternative pathway, is an award of a diploma. And the students that obtain a diploma through the alternative pathway, meaning they're eligible for the California alternate assessment, they can stay through age 22. So if they earn their diploma at 18, they are still eligible to receive free and appropriate public education into age 22 if they get the diploma through the alternative pathway, which is different than if a student is 18 and gets that standard diploma. So I just want to make that distinction. You can get a diploma under the alternative pathway and still receive free and appropriate public education until 22. And as Kristen shared, the difference where you will see the district may put something different on their diploma, but they are not required to. So you may see something different on a diploma, but it is not a requirement because the differentiation comes on the transcripts. So those transcripts are made up of a course of study, right? The classes that a student is taking towards a diploma. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about the course of study. The course of study is a little bit different between the two pathways. And that course of study, and those of you that maybe have been at an IEP meeting and gone over an individual transition plan, you'll see there's a section to delineate the course of study. The IEP teams must decide on the courses that are going to align to the pathway for those students. And it should be in the least restrictive environment. So again, just because you're on this pathway through the alternative pathway does not mean you are required to be in a segregated setting. You can still, the least restrictive environment is still what we are looking at for all students. So on the next slide, you'll see that students who are eligible for the alternate assessment are typically students who require extensive modifications to the curriculum and instruction in order to access those grade level standards. And districts are going to be utilizing curriculum and instruction in those aligned state standards or alternate achievement standards for the students. So these students should be having access to these alternate assessments well before they are hitting high school. So we'll talk in a moment, but we need to be setting these students up for access to the alternate achievement standards throughout their educational career. So what does this alternative pathway look like in action, whether you're here as a family member or a school? On the next slide, we're going to go 2 slides. One more. There you go. If you're here as a family member, or maybe you're supporting family members at the IEP team table, we need to make sure we're starting these discussions early in a child's life. It should not be at age 16 when they are doing their required ITP. We know California has added AB 438, which allows for IEP teams to consider the transition services and supports as the student is entering high school. But we need to be thinking also as students are being determined eligible to take the alternate assessment, that we're having these conversations about what the alternate assessment means for this child. As a parent or a family member, become familiar with the different diploma requirements and what each pathway means for your child. A few slides ago, we talked about each of the different pathways and what it means for future opportunities. Make sure you know those things. And if you don't know, make sure you ask questions. Ask your child's case manager or school site principal and get support that you need. Our family empowerment centers are another great resource for you if you have any questions. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the alternative pathway in action in schools. And as you heard, this is a relatively recent addition to our education code, and districts are working hard to figure this out. And they're working to ensure that each child has access to the grade level standards, even at the elementary school level. So because a student is in an extensive support needs class, they should still have access to grade level standards. They may be modified, they may be adapted, they may need supports, but this is important that we start early in their elementary school career. Districts and schools, make sure that you're implementing this pathway using a team approach. We need guidance counselors that are typically working with students in general education to understand this pathway. So we're not limiting anything within our school sites. So making sure that your curriculum departments, your guidance counselors, your school site principals, everybody is working to help support this particular pathway, just like they support all the other pathways in your school district. And making sure that part of that communication is connecting with families. And California Includes shared that resource several slides ago, which is a great tool to communicate with families about this alternative pathway. On the next slide, you'll see an additional resource. This is guidance from the California Department of Education that answers a lot of the questions about the diploma, the transcripts, the right of children to or students to receive a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So this is another great tool that if you're not already familiar with, that I would encourage you to check out. So I think Kristen and I will be taking on some of these questions that I see popping up in the chat. But on the next slide, if you want to stay in touch with the High Quality IEPs project, we do have our contact list that is available for you to sign up for our listserv and our resources. And then also, if you'd like to follow us on social media to keep up to date with our resources. So I think we have probably no time. I'll defer to Robin to see how much time we have for the questions.
Heather, I have one. I do see one question that I think if we have 30 seconds to mention, because this is
the certificate of completion.
Well, yes. So, well, the question is, can a parent opt out or the IEP determine not to do the alt pathway? And so I think one way to think about it is it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? You can still work on your functional skills, work on your employment skills and pre-employment skills. And if you could look at course taking across that entire time you can be in the high school experience to be able to meet those minimum requirements. I think the question we have to ask ourselves as parents is, do we want to limit our students' ability to get new information? And one of the reasons that every district is required to provide grade level standards based instruction to every student is so that we're presuming that every student will benefit from new information. That said, it does have to be at a level where a student can access it. And that is the benefit to the alt pathway, is it can be scaffolded to a level where students can access it, making it real for them. Did you want to add anything else to that piece, Heather?
Nope, I think you got it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, both of you. So much information, so many resources, and I appreciate you answering some of those pieces coming in the chat. And there are a few things that maybe couldn't be answered during our time here, and that's okay. If you didn't get your question that you had put in the chat, please make sure you put your email address or reach out. If you'd like to put your email address, great. Otherwise, reach out to the contact information here, or reach out to us, and we can definitely funnel your question to get it to the right place. So we can go to the next slide. And that one, thank you. And so we do have a feedback survey, and we want to hear from you. So what was your biggest takeaway from this session today? Is there anything further that you'd be interested in learning about? Social, emotional well-being, family school partnerships, all kinds of topics. What else is it that's of interest to you that we can include in these sessions? We have a QR code here, and we also have a link, and we encourage you to share with us about this session as well as future opportunities. Next slide. We invite you to register for a future opportunity. Upcoming webinar, this is a reminder here, and we are having these on the fourth Thursday of the month, 11 to 12. And here's a QR code as well as a link to register, and you can see the upcoming sessions through our website. Next slide. And so on behalf of the California Department of Education and CEDA Partnership and the Sacramento County Office of Education, I want to acknowledge and thank Kristen Wright and Heather DeFede for presenting in this session and sharing all this wonderful information. And through learning together, we strengthen partnerships. So we thank everybody for joining us here today and learning together with us in this webinar.